Good evening. Elvis Presley died today. He was 42. Apparently it was a heart attack.
August 16th, 1977 will be remembered as the day Memphis lost a king.
His doctor pronounced him dead at 3 o'clock this afternoon.
This is the ABC Evening News.
Elvis Presley's family and friends and fans assembled in Memphis, Tennessee through the night and into today. The crowd outside the Presley home was estimated at 10,000 this afternoon, and units of the Tennessee National Guard were activated to help keep order.
2020's hour-long investigation with Geraldo Rivera in 1979 disclosed Elvis's long and troubled abuse of dangerous drugs.
Elvis had a serious drug problem every day. The last 2 years of Elvis's life, it was every day.
On the evening of June 26, 1977, Elvis Presley, the once-in-a-generation performer whose swiveling hips, electrifying voice, and rebellious charm forever altered the landscape of American music and earned him the simple moniker, The King, took the stage at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis. Elvis appeared bloated, puffy-faced, and visibly ill. He moved slowly and he sweated profusely under the stage lights, dabbing at his brow with a handkerchief between songs. Yet, when the band struck the opening chords of the song C.C. Rider and the crowd roared to its feet, Elvis became Elvis again. His voice was still remarkably powerful, rich, deep, and commanding. He joked with the crowd between numbers, offering wry, off-the-cuff one-liners like, "Don't worry, if I forget the words, I'll just make up new ones," and he laughed along with the audience. It was clear he was struggling to catch his breath, and at times he leaned on the piano for support. But the charisma, the mystique, it all still radiated from him, undimmed by the years of excess. He performed a 23-song set that night, closing with an emotional rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love. As he sang the final notes, the crowd erupted in a standing ovation that echoed through the arena even after Elvis had exited the stage. Backstage, he collapsed into a chair in his dressing room, exhausted. It would be the last time Elvis Presley would ever perform. He returned to Graceland, his private sanctuary in Memphis, where he would remain for the next 51 days. He became a recluse, retreating into the upper floors of the mansion, a space so private that even longtime staff and family members weren't allowed inside. Only a small inner circle, including his 20-year-old fiancée, Ginger Alden, had regular access. Over the ensuing weeks, his health sharply declined. He suffered from glaucoma, high blood pressure, liver damage, and a painfully enlarged colon, each of which were exacerbated by, if not directly caused by, years of prescription drug abuse. His dependency on sedatives, painkillers, and amphetamines had escalated to the point where he was taking dozens of pills a day. Despite his worsening condition, Elvis brushed off the concerns of his doctors and his fiancée. But the toll on his body was irreversible. He struggled to sleep without heavy sedatives, and he often stayed up late at night reading religious texts, police procedural novels, and magazines teasing out conspiracy theories about the Kennedy assassinations. He would eat erratically, binging on peanut butter and banana sandwiches, cheeseburgers, and ice cream, sometimes in the middle of the night. He gained a huge amount of weight and grew increasingly irritable and paranoid. His face was pale, his speech at times slurred. Despite all of this, Elvis believed, or at least pretended to believe, that he could bounce back, reclaim his crown, and begin touring again. On August 15th, Elvis confirmed plans to fly out on a new tour, with a scheduled concert the following night in Portland, Maine. His private jet, named the Lisa Marie, was fueled and waiting. That evening, Elvis and Ginger went to see his dentist, Lester Hoffman, about persistent tooth pain. The King had a personal dentist on call day and night, often to prescribe painkillers, sleeping pills, and other cocktails of medication. And then at 2:30 a.m., Elvis had a late-night visit from his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick for short, who gave him a new round of medication. At 4 a.m., Elvis telephoned his cousin Billy and his wife Jo and asked them to come play racquetball in the court at his house. Despite the hour, this was not unusual. Everyone around Elvis, who were either paid by him or enjoyed his largesse, was always available to him. They played for an hour until Elvis and Ginger returned home at 5 a.m. Over the next several hours, Elvis took an array of medications in a fruitless effort to sleep. Finally, at 9:30, he got out of bed and, wearing gold pajamas and carrying a copy of a book called The Scientific Search for the Face of Jesus, he went into the master bathroom. Ginger fell asleep and then awoke at 2 p.m. and noticed Elvis was not in the bed. She forced open the bathroom door and found him unresponsive, face down on the shag carpet, his pajamas bunched around his ankles and his arms rigid. There were signs he had fallen forward off the toilet and hit the floor with full force. Ginger screamed. Emergency services were called at 2:33 p.m. and paramedics arrived within minutes and attempted resuscitation, first on the floor, then in the ambulance. He was rushed to Baptist Memorial Hospital, but doctors could not revive him. At 3:30 p.m., Elvis was officially pronounced dead. Elvis Presley was 42 years old. I'm Jason Beckerman.
I'm Derek Kaufman.
This is Last Days, Elvis Presley.
The official cause of death was initially reported as a heart attack, but the toxicology report painted a clearer picture. There was a cocktail of drugs in Elvis's system, including codeine, Valium, morphine, Demerol, and multiple sedatives. Further analysis suggested that while none of the drugs individually reached toxic levels, their combined effect, known as polypharmacy, likely contributed to his death. Additionally, Presley suffered from several chronic health issues such as hypertension, an enlarged heart, liver damage, and severe constipation. One forensic pathologist later said Elvis had, quote, the colon of an 80-year-old man, and that his body was, quote, a ticking time bomb. Authorities in Memphis quickly made Dr. Nick the focal point of their death investigation, and for nearly 3 years they examined every facet of his practice. In 1980, he was indicted on 14 counts of over-prescribing controlled substances to Elvis and to 13 other patients, including the singer Jerry Lee Lewis. Prosecutors alleged that in the 2.5-year period between January 1975 and July 1977, when Elvis died, Dr. Nick prescribed him more than 19,000 doses of narcotics, sedatives, and stimulants. That averages out to approximately 20 doses of narcotics per day, every day, for over 2.5 years. Dr. Nick defended his actions in court by stating he had only ever aimed to manage Presley's drug dependency and prevent him from obtaining drugs illegally. The jury apparently bought it, and they acquitted Dr. Nick on all counts, concluding that he had acted in the best interests of his patients. He was, however, publicly disgraced, and his medical license was revoked. For the rest of his life, Dr. Nick maintained his innocence, pleading that his intentions were never malicious. In later interviews, he reflected on his relationship with Elvis with a mixture of regret and defensiveness. Quote, I probably cared too much, he said. I just wanted to keep him alive. For some, the comment read as a painful admission of misplaced loyalty, and for others, it revealed the tragic codependence that marked the final years of Presley's life, a superstar in steady decline, enabled by those who loved him most.
We've seen this before. I mean, MJ and Prince, it's almost the exact same thing. MJ really is this is just an echo of MJ, or MJ's an echo of this. Right?
It really is. You have enablers, doctors.
All the doctors, like MJ and Prince. Elvis doctor shopped. He went to his dentist who he had on 24-hour call. He went to his doctor, Dr. Nick, who he had on 24-hour call. Dr. Nick alone prescribes him, 19,000 doses of medication over 2.5 years.
It's enough to kill an elephant.
That doesn't include what he's getting from his dentist, because that very same night, he got additional medication from his dentist. And who knows how many other doctors were in his pocket.
You know, these doctors become the villains of these stories. Conrad Murray faced this, of course, in the Michael Jackson case, and so did Dr. Nick many years earlier. I do have some sympathy for them. Even a medical professional who takes a Hippocratic oath to do no harm is under an extraordinary amount of stress when you're dealing with someone on the level of fame of Michael Jackson or Elvis Presley, and it takes intense fortitude to resist their demands. Now, that is their responsibility, but on a human level, I have a degree of sympathy for these doctors who are bullied by men who are much more famous than them.
So he said exactly what Dr. Murray said, Dr. Nick did in his trial. He said, basically, this guy was an addict, and he was going to get it somewhere. And what I did was gave it to him in a really controlled environment where I could monitor his vitals and everything else. Now, the problem with Dr. Nick's argument, as it facially makes sense, is he died because of it.
He did.
And so
he gave him too much.
You're saying that you were there to manage it so he wasn't an addict and got it elsewhere, but the results were the same as what you feared. So therefore, you become no better than the prescriber off the streets or whatever.
That's right. The people on the streets, you have the risk of getting, hot doses, fentanyl laced with it, and
Back
so
then,
forth.
No fentanyl, but yes, the same
idea.
Exists, right?
But he didn't manage it. He gave him too much.
Yeah. The drugs that Elvis was taking were not about partying. They never are. Same with Prince. Same with Michael Jackson. So many others. Not about partying. They were about coping. He had all this pain, physical pain. He had worn himself out on stage.
Michael Jackson had the pain from the burn incident and from years on the road.
And like
it's always
all
the same
of these
story.
guys who are so famous, so young, they just are burdened with expectations and loneliness. You know, if you ever saw the Elvis movie, a lot of it was him alone in that mansion, not being able to really have friends around, not trusting people who weren't after him for his money. And the legacy is complicated because for all the stories about his decline, his musical influence is totally unparalleled. He is simply among the most important figures in modern history of pop music. And again, we just keep going back to the parallels of MJ and Prince, you know, two of the most important figures in pop history, enabled by doctors to ultimately kill themselves.
They're the king of rock and roll and the king of pop. There's no bigger.
When we talk about Elvis Presley, we're not just talking about a musician. We're talking about the birth of the modern rock star. His debut in 1954 is one of the seminal moments in American art and culture, a turning point when the old world of post-war conservatism began to crack and something utterly new, raw, and electric happened. Until that moment, American popular music was largely segregated and restrained, shaped by sanitized crooners and polite swing bands. When 19-year-old Elvis recorded That's All Right at Sun Studios in Memphis, what emerged was shocking. Black musical tradition reinterpreted through a white Southern voice, with a sound that defied categorization. It wasn't country, it wasn't blues, it wasn't gospel, it was something entirely new, and it hit like lightning. This was the birth of rock and roll as a national force, and overnight, it provoked a national reaction. Teenagers across the country were electrified, recognizing in Elvis a kind of rebellious authenticity that gave voice to their restlessness. For many in power, Elvis was a threat. Politicians, clergy, and commentators condemned his performances as immoral. The Catholic weekly, The Tablet, called him a corrupter of youth. Mississippi Congressman Arthur Winstead warned that Elvis was, quote, undermining the moral fiber of America's young people. TV host Ed Sullivan famously vowed never to have him on a show, until the ratings forced his hand just a few months later in September 1956.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, yes, that's right, Elvis Presley. You ain't nothing but
To Elvis's critics, his swiveling hips and sensual stage presence signaled a dangerous collapse of decency. To his fans, it was liberation. He wasn't just singing songs, he was shattering barriers between black and white music and between the sacred and the profane. His first number one hit was Heartbreak Hotel in April 1956, and he went on to have 4 more number ones that year, including Don't Be Cruel, Love Me Tender, and his biggest hit ever, Hound Dog, which spent 11 weeks at number 1, setting a record until Boyz II Men topped it with End of the Road in 1992. Further, his 1956 movie Love Me Tender was a huge hit, and it solidified him as a full-blown cultural phenomenon. Over the next 2 years, Elvis scored 6 more number ones, the biggest being All Shook Up and Jailhouse Rock. This degree of chart domination over such a short time, 10 number ones in 2+ years, was totally unheard of at the time, and is even today rivaled only by what the Beatles did a decade later.
Elvis didn't just sing songs, he inhabited them, transforming lyrics into living performances through the sheer force of his voice and the magnetism of his onstage presence. He wasn't a musical genius in the mold of Prince or Paul McCartney. He wrote little and played guitar modestly, but what he lacked in technical musicianship, he more than made up for in raw, unteachable charisma. Elvis may well have been the greatest fusion of vocalist and stage performer the world has ever seen. Only Michael Jackson compares. And from March 1958 through March of 1960, Elvis served 2 years of compulsory military service in Germany, and his return home was one of the most anticipated pop culture moments of the time, and questions were raised about whether he could recapture the magic of the mid-50s. His first single, It's Now or Never, released 3 months after his return, put all those concerns to rest. It spent 5 weeks at number 1 and went on to sell over 20 million copies, making it one of the best-selling singles of all time. Adapted from the classic Italian aria O Sole Mio, It's Now or Never was a stylistic departure from Elvis's earlier rockabilly hits. He fully embraced the song's operatic influences and delivered a soaring performance that blended classical control with that emotional urgency that proved Elvis was different than anyone who had come before him.
It's now or never. Come hold me tight. Kiss me, my darling. Be mine tonight.
But following the release of It's Now or Never in 1960, Elvis's life began to shift, subtly at first, and then unmistakably. The song marked one of the high points of his career. But behind that triumphant return, cracks were beginning to form. During his compulsory 2-year stint in the military from 1958 to 59, Elvis had been introduced to amphetamines by fellow soldiers, initially as a way to stay alert during long drills and exhausting routines. What began as a practical solution quickly became a habit. After returning to civilian life, that reliance deepened. By the early 1960s, Elvis was increasingly dependent on prescription drugs, stimulants to wake up, sedatives to sleep, and painkillers to dull the physical toll of his demanding schedule.
His post-Army career also brought a different kind of pressure. Under the management of Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis was steered away from raw, gritty music towards a more commercial path: films, soundtracks, and family-friendly pop. Though the formula was lucrative, it was also artistically stifling. Between 60 and 69, Elvis made nearly 30 movies, many of which he openly disliked. He often felt like a commodity, going through the motions on set while losing the connection to the music that once fueled him. This emotional frustration further fed his growing dependence on pills, a way to cope with the numbing routine of pop fame. By the time he launched his 1968 comeback special, the addiction had taken root, though it was still largely hidden behind stage lights and charisma. Elvis remained magnetic on stage, capable of channeling soul and passion at will, but offstage the pill bottles multiplied and the circle around him tightened. Friends, bandmates, and even doctors became enablers, eager to keep the king functioning regardless of the long-term cost. But in 1969, Elvis showed he still had it at least one more time with the release of Suspicious Minds, which I personally believe is one of the greatest songs ever written, by a man from Memphis named Mark James. James first recorded the song in 1968, but it flopped commercially. But in early 69, James learned that Presley, who by this time hadn't had a hit in several years, had booked a studio to record what would become his From Elvis in Memphis album, and was looking for a mature rock and roll song to bring him back. One of the studio crew got Elvis to listen to Suspicious Minds, and he knew right away he could turn it into a hit. He did more than that. He made it into something that possibly no other person who has ever lived could have done. Listen to how Elvis builds emotional momentum from the very first note, beginning with a restrained, vulnerable plea, singing, "We're caught in a trap, I can't walk out," and then, as the strings and rhythm swell, his voice grows more urgent, and the chorus rises like a gospel sermon as he unravels emotionally.
We're caught in a trap, I can't walk out, because I love you too much, baby. Why can't you see what you're doing to me? When you don't believe a word I say. We can't go on together.
You know, I went through a phase where I adored late period Elvis. I think his musicianship as an artist grew so much. Hound Dog, all the early songs, they're vibrant, but they feel of an era, and they feel like this is the dawn of rock and roll, but nothing I'd turn on. Suspicious Minds is still on my playlist.
So I had this conversation with Charles.
In the Ghetto, all of
with
that.
our colleague Charles Early, who loves his rockabilly. He identifies Elvis as the rockabilly. That's who he is, rockabilly
Sure.
Elvis. I agree with you totally. Suspicious Minds, to me, I know he didn't write it. Mark James wrote it. To me, it's not only one of the greatest songs ever written, one of the greatest songs ever performed. It is perhaps my favorite song of all time. I think it is brilliant structurally to the extent I understand music and musicology. It's brilliantly structured. It's a perfect song.
Look, Sinead O'Connor didn't write Nothing Compares to You, Prince did, but it's her song.
That's
Suspicious Minds is Elvis's song.
He had this alchemy just between voice and body and performance. He didn't just sing to audiences. He ignited them. The fervor. I mean, you've seen it other times, right? The Beatles are the most classic example. Sure. The girls losing their marbles. Elvis was the first. He was the first one to be able to capture that.
And he was the first one to really evolve. The Beatles evolved from those mop-headed guys in the 60s into the drug-fueled Sgt. Pepper's days, and they really sort of became different artists and very, very respected late in their career. Elvis, too. The late lounge period, we think of him in the white jumpsuit, sweating on stage, but the music was incredible. And it stands up, I think, better.
Yeah, I agree completely. The Beatles are known for their transformation, very purposeful transformation from the young, clean-cut kids to the shaggy, hippies of the late 60s. Elvis, his transition, let's be honest, is the most famous part about his transition is he just put on a tremendous amount of weight.
That's right.
That's what we're talking about, and became drug-addled.
And some of the sex appeal stripped away. He was no longer the hip-swiveling guy. He was a fat guy sweating through a white jumpsuit, but he was still incredibly charismatic.
He was, and
he
his
could just
voice
hold a room.
still boomed, even in his latest, most sickly, that last concert in Indianapolis that we talked about at the top.
Oh, the footage is crazy. They recaptured it in the Elvis movie that came out, and he is profusely sweating at the piano.
But he's still banging it out. His voice is incredible. I mean, I guess he had such a short career music-wise that his voice never had time to lose. I'm sure he would have another 10 years or so. But at that point, just before his death, he
still had power behind it.
Yeah.
The Beatles, the Stones, Springsteen, U2, all of them stole or at least borrowed heavily from the blueprint Elvis drew. But of course, Elvis could never have been one to complain about others borrowing from his art. His entire musical identity, his voice, his movement, his rhythm, was built atop the foundation laid by black artists who came before him. Elvis absorbed it all and filtered it through his own Southern white experience. Songs like Hound Dog, originally recorded by Big Mama Thornton in 1953, were reinterpreted and electrified by Elvis in 1956, propelling him to heights Thornton never came close to reaching. What she did in smoky clubs and segregated recording studios, Elvis brought to national television and white mainstream audiences. Unlike many white performers of his era, though, Elvis never concealed or denied the black roots of his sound. In fact, he openly praised black musicians, both as inspiration and as peers. Quote, "The black folks been singing it and playing it just like I'm doing now, man, for more years than I know," Elvis told reporters in the 1950s. "I got it from them. Rock and roll is black music." When asked about his influences, he often cited artists like Arthur Big Boy Crudup, B.B. King, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino, and Mahalia Jackson, among others. He knew where the music came from, and he never claimed to have invented it. You know, Jason, this is different than how Pat Boone is remembered. Pat Boone was also a contemporary. He's still alive, by the way. He would cover Little Richard songs. If you ever talk to Eric Colley, one of our colleagues, about it, he would take Tutti Frutti, which had a lot of soul behind it, and he would whiten it up. He would release a cover version that did very well on the charts, but stripped all the soul out of it. Elvis never changed the music, and he never gave credit.
Never gave credit. Pat, that's the big difference, I think. I mean, look, I don't want to gloss it up too much. He became very, very wealthy singing songs that were written by black people for black people.
Yes.
And
if you ask Public Enemy, they don't like guys like
Chuck
Elvis Presley.
D was very famous.
Very critical.
Very critical. And there's a point there, and I don't want to gloss over that at all. But there's bad and there's evil. And what Pat Boone did falls into the latter category, which he would just take and not pay homage and not give any credit and just produce them as his own. And also it was terrible. Like Pat Boone's music is terrible.
Right.
And it's hard to put ourselves in the perspectives of somebody singing in the 1950s and 1960s, but what Pat Boone did was awful. What Elvis did was...
It's a different kind of cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Because he also celebrated and was trying to highlight and platform some of those artists when he was asked about it. He definitely commercially profited off of it. And that's worthy of a critical examination, but it was different than what some of the Pat Boones of their day did. And B.B. King, who knew Elvis from their early days in Memphis, once said, quote, "Elvis was different. He treated me like a man." In segregated 1950s America, that wasn't just unusual, it was radical. Elvis spent his youth hanging around Beale Street, soaking up the sounds of black Memphis, attending gospel services at black churches, and befriending musicians whose names were unknown to white audiences. His admiration was not cosmetic, it was genuine and immersive. And yet, while Elvis became the crowned king of rock and roll, many of his black influences never received the royalties, airtime, or accolades they deserved. Artists like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Ike Turner, and Willie Mae Big Mama Thornton helped create the very DNA of rock and roll, only to watch it become a vehicle for white stardom. Elvis became the icon, they became the footnotes. And that imbalance has rightly sparked this critical conversation in the decades since, particularly around cultural appropriation and systemic racism in the entertainment industry. But to cast Elvis as a thief is to really miss the nuance. He was not a pirate raiding a culture. He was a product of it, raised in a working class, racially mixed neighborhood in Tupelo, Mississippi, and drawn instinctively to the sound of struggle, joy, and soul that black music gave a voice to.
Elvis's return to the top of the charts with Suspicious Minds in 1969 was a moment of triumph, a blazing reminder of his power after years of formulaic movie roles and artistic stagnation. But it was also the final peak before the unraveling. Over the next 8 years, Elvis would undergo an inextricable decline, his body bloated by prescription drugs and his once electric stage presence dimmed by exhaustion and dependence. The man who had once redefined American cool ended his life in a tragically undignified scene, slumped on the bathroom floor at Graceland, his pants around his ankles and a book in his hand, as his heart finally gave out. Elvis Presley reshaped American music and redefined the very idea of modern celebrity, blending raw talent, sexuality, rebellion, and charisma into a cultural force like the world had never seen. Leonard Bernstein called Elvis, quote, the greatest cultural force in the 20th century, acknowledging not just Presley's sound, but the seismic shift he caused across race, class, and generational lines. And to Bruce Springsteen, Elvis was something even more personal. Quote, Elvis is my religion, he said. He was the first modern American. He was the first real rock star. He showed us what was possible, how to move, how to sound, how to liberate ourselves. There have been a lot of tough guys, a lot of cool guys, but there will only ever be one king.